At my son Arthur's lavish wedding, they seated me by the kitchen with complete strangers, while he and his new wife Clarice never looked my way. It was a cold insult, but I just smiled. They thought they'd dismissed me. They were wrong. What unfolded next was a nightmare they never saw coming. If you're ready for a story that will chill you, like and share, and tell us where you're listening from. The air in Rosecliff Mansion hummed with an opulent, almost suffocating cheer. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble floors, reflecting the muted gleam of the silver and gold decor. Eleanor Vance, her navy silk dress a quiet counterpoint to the dazzling white and blush of the wedding party, followed Ms. Bellamy, the relentlessly efficient wedding planner. Ms. Bellamy moved with a practiced grace, her smile fixed, leading Eleanor through a labyrinth of laughing faces and clinking glasses. Every turn brought a fresh wave of socialites, their designer clothes rustling, their conversations a melodic drone. Eleanor's gaze, however, cut through the throng, searching for a single face. There he was, her son, Arthur, towering over the crowd, his new bride, Clarice Thorne, clinging to his arm. Clarice, all sharp angles and blinding white lace, was a vision of modern beauty. Arthur's face was alight with a warmth Eleanor hadn't seen directed her way in months. He smiled, he laughed, he pressed Clarice closer, a possessive gesture that felt like a deliberate exclusion. Not once since the hasty ceremony an hour ago had his eyes met hers. Ms. Bellamy, oblivious or perhaps deliberately indifferent to Eleanor's growing unease, stopped abruptly. They were in a secluded alcove, almost an afterthought, behind an enormous floral arrangement that smelled of lilies and something faintly medicinal. The rhythmic thwack of the swinging kitchen doors was a constant backdrop, the faint aroma of roasting meats and forgotten spices wafting over. "And here we are," Miss Bellamy announced, her voice pitched a little too brightly for the quiet corner. Eleanor looked at the small, round table. It was set for 5. And there, amongst the crisp white linen and delicate silverware, was her place card. Eleanor Vance. The elegant script, for some reason, felt mocking, a cruel flourish on an already cutting insult. The other 4 cards were for strangers: Mr. Dawson, Miss Chen, Dr. Evans, and Mrs. Hayes. Not a single familiar face, not a single friendly gesture. "This is by the kitchen?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm, a stark contrast to the tightening knot in her stomach. She gestured vaguely toward the swinging doors that promised a constant parade of waitstaff and culinary clamor. Ms. Bellamy's smile didn't falter, though her eyes held a flicker of something unreadable. "Oh yes, last-minute adjustments for the governor's security, you understand, a minor reshuffle. But you have a lovely, intimate spot here, away from the main hustle." She didn't wait for a reply, already turning on her heel, her silhouette disappearing into the shimmering crowd like a ghost. Eleanor stood there for a moment, the cheerful din of the wedding feeling impossibly distant. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, she sank into her designated chair. The plush velvet offered little comfort against the sudden, crushing weight of her 67 years. The air, despite the general warmth of the room, felt cool against her skin, a premonition perhaps. She watched Arthur and Clarice, now seated at the magnificent head table, a king and queen on their thrones, surrounded by New York's elite, senators, industrialists, old money. Her table was literally the furthest point from them, in exile. It was then that Clarice looked up. Her gaze, sharp and knowing, found Eleanor across the ballroom. For a fleeting, chilling moment, their eyes locked. Clarice's crimson lips, so perfectly painted, curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was a smirk, cold and undeniable, a declaration of victory that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine, a subtle, silent promise of things to come. The smirk from Clarice lingered, a phantom chill on Eleanor's skin. She sat, a solitary island in a sea of strangers, the clatter of silverware and distant laughter a muffled roar. Her mind, however, wasn't focused on the present cacophony. It was tallying numbers. $93,000 for the honeymoon, a lavish 2-week excursion through the Swiss Alps and the Italian Riviera, all paid in full by Eleanor, a wedding gift that Clarice had chosen with an almost predatory glee. And that was on top of the $156,000 already funneled into this very event, ensuring every linen, every flower, every glimmering piece of crystal met Clarice Thorne's exacting standards. None of this, of course, was known to the esteemed Thorne family. Arthur had assured her with a hand squeeze and a hurried whisper that it was our secret, Mom, a secret that now felt like a lead weight in her gut. A young man with a camera slung around his neck paused by her table. Mr. Dawson, the photographer, he chirped, offering a fleeting professional smile. Before Eleanor could even nod, he was gone, swept back into the glittering currents of the reception, a quick flash of his lens illuminating nothing but empty air where her son should have been. Then, a familiar, kindly face materialized from the opulent haze. Mrs. Hayes, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, peered at Eleanor with genuine concern. Hayes, who lived 2 doors down from Eleanor for 30 years, who had baked cookies for Arthur's school fundraisers, who knew the boy before the man. "Eleanor, dear, there you are," she exclaimed, her voice dropping to a bewildered whisper as she took in the table, the kitchen doors, the unfamiliar faces. "Aren't you Arthur's mother? Why in heaven's name are you sitting all the way back here?" Her words, though innocent, felt like a public accusation, amplifying the insult. Eleanor merely offered a tight-lipped smile, a practiced mask. The truth would only embarrass Mrs. Hayes, and Eleanor had endured enough humiliation for one evening. "Last-minute arrangements," she murmured, echoing Miss Bellamy's flimsy excuse. The kitchen doors, a relentless rhythm section, pulsed behind her. Thwack, screech, clatter, shouted orders. A waiter zoomed past, trays laden with half-eaten appetizers. Another door swung open, revealing a flurry of white-coated chefs. The smell of rich sauces and frying garlic mingled with the sweet perfume of lilies, an incongruous and jarring sensory assault. This wasn't a minor reshuffle. It was an act of deliberate placement, a physical manifestation of her new status. Then, the lights dimmed, and a spotlight bathed the center of the dance floor. The opening chords of a classic love song swelled through the ballroom. Arthur and Clarice stepped into the spotlight, graceful and radiant, their first dance. Eleanor watched them, a lump forming in her throat. Arthur, so tall, so handsome, his eyes only for Clarice. Eleanor searched his face, desperately trying to find the boy she had raised, the child she had poured her entire being into. Memories, sharp and vivid, flickered through her mind like old photographs. Arthur at 5, missing his 2 front teeth, proudly displaying a crayon drawing of a lopsided house. Arthur at 12, clutching a blue ribbon from the school science fair, his face smudged with grease from a homemade motor. Arthur at 18, a nervous but eager freshman, hugging her tightly before disappearing into the sprawling campus gates. Arthur at 26, beaming in his white coat, his medical school diploma clutched in his hand, a testament to years of her sacrifice, her encouragement, her unwavering belief. She remembered Clarice, visiting their cozy Savannah home for the first time, her perfectly manicured hands sweeping dismissively. "It's quaint, Arthur," she'd said, the word dripping with thinly veiled disdain. Clarice, who had then gently, persistently begun to steer Arthur away from his initial dreams of a small-town practice, away from the life Eleanor had always envisioned for him, a life close to family, rooted in community. "Why settle for that, Arthur? You're meant for something bigger, something grander. New York needs your talent." The realization hit Eleanor with a crushing force, settling deep in her bones, chilling her to the core. The kitchen table, the strangers, the deliberate distance. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a message. Clarice's smirk echoed in her mind, a clear, unmistakable message. You are no longer needed. You are on the periphery. You are dismissed. A cold, unfamiliar thought began to crystallize in Eleanor's mind, a question that felt dangerous, almost forbidden. What would happen, she wondered, if she just stopped providing? If the wellspring of support, financial and otherwise, simply ran dry? The thought was terrifying, exhilarating. The first dance ended, punctuated by polite applause. Then Sterling Thorne, Clarice's father, a man whose expensive suit seemed to radiate wealth, rose to deliver his toast. His voice, smooth and resonant, filled the ballroom. He spoke of Clarice's beauty, her intelligence, her family's long-standing legacy. When he turned his attention to Arthur, It wasn't with warmth or welcome, but with a cool, appraising air. He lauded Arthur's medical achievements, his impeccable lineage, excellent breeding potential, he actually said. But not once did he mention Eleanor. Not a single word acknowledging the woman who had brought Arthur into the world, who had sacrificed everything to ensure his success. It was as if she simply did not exist. Mrs. Hayes, bless her kind heart, leaned over to Eleanor. "You haven't touched your salmon, dear," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Are you all right?" Eleanor managed another strained smile. "Just enjoying the ambience, Mrs. Hayes," she lied, pushing a piece of the perfectly cooked fish around her plate. The rich, savory aroma, usually a delight, now turned her stomach. Her gaze drifted back to Arthur. He was laughing now, a polished, unfamiliar sound, a mirror image of Clarice's own practiced, socialite titter. He mimicked her dismissive flick of the wrist, her imperious tilt of the head when a waiter approached. He was becoming a stranger, polished and perfect, but hollow. The son she knew, the one with the earnest gaze and slightly awkward charm, was vanishing before her eyes, replaced by the suave, aloof imitation. Just then, Dr. Evans, one of her anonymous table mates, returned from the bar, a fresh drink in hand. He was a portly, jovial man, clearly enjoying the open bar. He settled into his seat with a sigh of contentment. "Nothing like Arthur's first wedding, is there?" he mused, taking a long sip. Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes wide. The words cut through the daze of her despair, a sharp, unexpected shock. "His first wedding?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You were at his wedding to Lydia?" Arthur Evans blinked, then chuckled. "Oh yes, small garden ceremony, lovely affair, really. You weren't there?" He frowned, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Eleanor's mind reeled. Lydia, Arthur's college sweetheart. He had told her they'd broken up amicably, that they'd simply grown apart. Never a word about a wedding. The betrayal, the deceit, twisted in her gut, a fresh wound bleeding into the old. He hadn't just hidden a relationship, he'd hidden a marriage. A whole chapter of his life, kept secret from his own mother. I need some air," Eleanor murmured, pushing back her chair with a scraping sound that drew a momentary glance from Mrs. Hayes. She rose, her movements stiff, and walked away from the clamor and the lights, away from the cloying sweetness of the lilies and the crushing weight of her son's lies. She pushed through a heavy glass door and stepped onto the dark terrace, the cool, salty air of the Atlantic washing over her, a welcome balm. The vast, inky expanse of the ocean stretched out before her, a stark contrast to the glittering artifice within. A voice, too close, too familiar, startled her. "Mother, I've been looking for you." Eleanor turned slowly. Arthur stood there, a shadow against the muted glow from the ballroom. He looked annoyed, his carefully constructed composure fraying at the edges. "Have you?" Eleanor retorted, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I've been rather hard to miss at the kitchen table, wouldn't you say?" He bristled. "Mother, don't be dramatic. Clarice handled the seating arrangements. You know how she is." He tried to sound exasperated, but there was a defensive edge to his tone. "Clarice," Eleanor repeated, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "Clarice arranged for me to be banished to the servants' entrance, surrounded by strangers? Clarice arranged for my name to be omitted from your father-in-law's toast? Clarice arranged for you to forget you ever had a mother?" The words tumbled out, each one a sharp dart aimed at the heart of his deception. Arthur's face hardened. "You're making a scene, Mother. This is my wedding day." "Your wedding day," Eleanor echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Is it also the day you intended to finally tell me you were already married once before? To Lydia? Or was that another one of Clarice's arrangements?" Arthur flinched, his carefully cultivated mask finally cracking. A flash of guilt, quickly replaced by anger, crossed his features. "That has nothing to do with anything," he hissed, his voice low and tight. "It was a mistake, a youthful indiscretion. It doesn't matter now." "Doesn't matter?" Eleanor felt a cold fury rising, eclipsing the hurt. "My son kept a marriage secret from me for years, and it doesn't matter?" He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, a visible tremor in his fingers. The confident facade was crumbling. Actually, he said, avoiding her gaze, his voice losing its indignant edge, replaced by a strained urgency. I needed to speak with you about the honeymoon payment. They're asking for the final installment tonight. Clarice's travel agent just called. It needs to be wired within the hour or they'll cancel the suites. The cold, hard truth slammed into Eleanor. He wasn't looking for her out of concern or even irritation. He was looking for money. Just money. The realization was a poison, seeping into every corner of her heart, solidifying the dangerous thought that had taken root at her lonely table. The thought of what would happen if she simply stopped. The salt spray from the Atlantic misted Eleanor's face, cool and sharp, doing little to quell the burning resentment inside of her. Arthur's confession, a thinly veiled demand for money, hung heavy in the air between them. Her son, standing before her, a stranger in a tailored tuxedo, reduced their relationship to a transaction. How much? Eleanor asked, her voice quiet, almost devoid of inflection. The question was a challenge, a test of his audacity. Arthur shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, his eyes darting towards the illuminated ballroom. The final installment, 30,000. They won't release the bookings otherwise. The sum, casually stated, felt enormous, a further testament to the lavish lifestyle Clarice demanded and Arthur enabled. Eleanor's eyes followed his. Through the grand archway of the terrace, she could see Clarice, a beacon of white lace surrounded by her bridesmaids, their heads together giggling behind perfectly manicured hands. The image cemented her fate, a chilling premonition. She wasn't just Eleanor Vance, Arthur's mother. She was and would forever be the ATM mother-in-law. Arthur, Eleanor began, her voice carefully modulated, each word precise. Do the Thorns know I'm paying for your honeymoon? His gaze snapped back to her, a flicker of irritation, then shame across his face. His silence was answer enough. The Thorn family, steeped in generations of inherited wealth, would undoubtedly balk at the idea of a literature professor's widow funding their daughter's opulent travels. It was a carefully constructed facade one Eleanor had inadvertently helped build. Just like they don't know I covered the down payment for your New York condo, she continued, her voice gaining a steely edge, or the annual fees for that exclusive country club membership you joined last year, the one that opened so many doors for you. Each revelation was a nail in the coffin of their unspoken agreement, a quiet testament to her unwavering support, now twisted into a weapon of his deceit. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Then she delivered the final blow. And does Clarice know about your student loans, Arthur? The ones I still help you pay, even after all these years of practicing medicine? Arthur flushed, a dark red creeping up his neck, contrasting sharply with his pristine white collar. His jaw tightened. He had no answer. The carefully crafted image of the successful, self-sufficient New York doctor was crumbling, exposing the fragile, dependent boy beneath. You're mortgaging your soul for admission to a world that will never truly accept you, Eleanor stated, her voice quiet but firm, imbued with the sorrow of a mother watching her child lose himself. You're sacrificing your integrity, your honesty, everything you once stood for, just to fit into their gilded cage. He let out a brittle, humorless laugh, a sound that grated on her nerves. The real me isn't the small-town doctor son of a literature professor, mother, he sneered, finally meeting her gaze, his eyes hard and cold. The real me is meant for more than Savannah. I've outgrown it. I've outgrown you. The words, sharp and cruel, pierced her heart. But instead of wilting, Eleanor felt a surge of cold defiance. Have you outgrown decency too, Arthur? She challenged, her chin lifting. Have you outgrown honor, gratitude, and respect? Or are those simply inconvenient traits in your new, elevated world? Before Arthur could reply, Clarice's voice, shrill and impatient, cut through the night, carrying clearly from the ballroom. Arthur, Daddy's looking for you. The photographer wants the family portraits now. Her tone was not an invitation, but an order. Arthur's attention immediately snapped to his new wife. He glanced back at Eleanor, a fleeting expression of resentment and impatience. I'll text you the account details, he muttered, already turning away. Just get it wired tonight. He didn't wait for a response, simply strode back into the dazzling lights, leaving Eleanor alone on the terrace, the vast, dark ocean her only witness. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a familiar chime. She looked down. A text message from Arthur. A string of numbers. His payment request. Eleanor stared at the screen for a long moment, the cool wind whipping around her. Then slowly, deliberately, she slid the phone back into her small clutch without replying. The decision, sharp and resolute, had been made. There would be no more payments, no more sacrifices for a son who no longer recognized her, for a daughter-in-law who openly scorned her. The game had changed. If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this shocking tale. Let's see what happens next. The opulent silence of her hotel suite was a stark contrast to the thumping music of the reception, which likely still raged on at the Rosecliff mansion. It was well past midnight. Eleanor sat on the edge of the plush bed, the heavy velvet of her navy dress still clinging to her phone clutched in her hand. The screen glowed with an insistent, frantic urgency. Missed calls from Arthur, 5, then 6, then 10. A barrage of text messages, each growing more desperate, then more accusatory. The last one, delivered barely minutes ago, cut deep. "Are you trying to embarrass me? Call me now." She stared at the words, a cold sense of resolve hardening inside her. He wasn't worried about her or about the blatant disrespect of the evening. He was worried about his image, about the inconvenience, about the money. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor finally pressed the call button. He answered instantly, his voice tight, strained, vibrating with barely contained fury. "Where have you been, Mother? The resort manager has been waiting for an hour. Do you have any idea how late it is?" Eleanor allowed a moment of silence to stretch between them, letting his anger simmer. "I'm in my hotel room, Arthur," she replied, her voice calm, level, betraying none of the turmoil within her. "And as for the resort manager, perhaps you should have thought of that before assuming I would simply pay for your honeymoon without question, as I always have." He scoffed, a short, bitter sound. "Don't be ridiculous. Clarice just told me she apologized for the seating. It was a mistake, an oversight. There's no need for this drama, Mother." Eleanor almost laughed. "Clarice apologized? Arthur, she didn't just seat me by the kitchen, she orchestrated it." And her smirk spoke volumes. "Don't insult my intelligence or yours by repeating her lies." He was silent for a moment, clearly caught off guard by her directness. "Look, I know things have been difficult," he began, attempting a placating tone that sounded utterly fake. "But this is important. We can't cancel the honeymoon, Mother. It's Clarice's dream trip." "Do you remember, Arthur," Eleanor interjected, ignoring his plea, "when you were 10 and you desperately wanted those expensive basketball sneakers, the ones all your friends had?" He paused, confused by the sudden change of topic. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," she said softly. "You earned them, Arthur. You mowed lawns, you washed cars, you saved every dime. You understood their value because you worked for them. I think somewhere along the way, you've forgotten the value of things that come too easily. This isn't about some childhood sneakers, Mother." His voice rose, tinged with outrage. "This is about my life, my career. I'm a successful surgeon, for heaven's sake. What are you implying? That I can't afford my own honeymoon? Is this about money?" "No, Arthur," Eleanor corrected him, her voice unwavering. "This isn't about money. Not really. This is about respect. Your respect for me, your respect for yourself, and the respect you allow Clarice to deny me at every turn." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. He had no answer for that, no clever deflection. Then, with a resolve that surprised even herself, Eleanor delivered her verdict. "The honeymoon payment won't be coming, Arthur. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not ever from me." His breath hitched. The anger, the frustration drained from his voice, replaced by a raw disbelief. His voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "You can't be serious. Clarice will be devastated. Veronica, the travel agent, will be furious. This will ruin everything." "It may ruin your immediate plans, Arthur," Eleanor conceded, her heart aching even as she stood firm. But perhaps it's time you learn that actions have consequences, and that true value isn't measured in luxury suites or designer labels. She closed her eyes, picturing the earnest, gap-toothed boy, the proud science fair winner, the hopeful medical student. "I love you, Arthur," she said, her voice laced with profound sadness. "I love you enough to stop enabling behavior that's changing you into someone you were never meant to be, someone I no longer recognize." The line crackled with his stunned silence. Eleanor knew this was the beginning of a new painful chapter, a complete severing of the umbilical cord that had bound them financially for so long. She wondered with a chilling certainty what the true cost of that severing would be. Arthur's stunned silence didn't last. The whisper of disbelief quickly morphed into a furious, wounded roar. "If you do this, Mother," he spat, his voice laced with venom, "if you truly cut us off, don't expect to be welcome in our lives ever again. Don't expect to see me or any grandchildren. If we have them, you will be cut out. Completely." Eleanor felt a fresh stab of pain, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of grim finality. The ultimatum, so cruel and absolute, solidified her resolve. "Then so be it, Arthur," she said, her voice steady, surprisingly devoid of tremor. She heard his sharp intake of breath, a sound of frustrated rage. Without another word, Eleanor ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken grief and the echoes of a broken bond. She spent the rest of the night in a restless sleep, the conversation replaying in her mind. The image of Clarice's smirk now replaced by Arthur's betrayed fury. The sharp, insistent knock on her hotel room door cut through the fragile peace of her early morning sleep. Eleanor blinked, disoriented, the Newport light barely filtering through the thick drapes. Another knock, more aggressive this time. She rose, pulling on her silk robe, her heart pounding a slow, deliberate rhythm. When she opened the door, she found Clarice Thorne standing in the hallway, already dressed in a chic designer travel suit, her designer luggage undoubtedly waiting downstairs. Clarice's perfectly made-up face was contorted with a fury that transformed her beauty into something sharp and predatory. "Don't even think about playing the sweet southern matron with me, Mrs. Vance," Clarice snarled, her voice low and dangerous, barely containing a volcanic rage. "Arthur told me what you're doing." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, a practiced elegance in her calm demeanor. She walked to the window, pulling back the heavy drapes to let the pale, cool light of the Newport morning flood the room. The ocean shimmered in the distance, a serene contrast to the storm brewing in her doorway. "And what exactly," Eleanor asked, turning back to face her daughter-in-law, "do you believe I am doing, Clarice?" Clarice scoffed, her red lips twisting. "Withholding the honeymoon money after everything. Arthur said it's because of some ridiculous seating arrangement." Eleanor sighed, a genuine weary sound. "The table," she began, her voice soft but firm, "was a symptom, Clarice, not the cause. It was simply the culmination of a pattern, a clear message that I was no longer valued, merely tolerated. And I've been enabling behavior that isn't healthy for Arthur, or frankly, for your marriage, by allowing him to maintain a facade he can't truly afford." Clarice looked genuinely bewildered. Then her eyes narrowed. "This is typical mother-in-law control. Trying to manipulate him now that he's married." She scoffed again. "We don't need your money. My father is more than capable of providing for his daughter." Eleanor held Clarice's gaze steadily. "Because Arthur told me the Thornes believe he paid for the entire wedding and for your extravagant honeymoon. He never mentioned my contributions, did he? The $156,000 for the venue, the catering, the flowers, or the $93,000 for your European trip that he told me was our secret." Clarice's face, usually so composed, crumpled in genuine shock. Her crimson lips parted slightly, her eyes wide, a blush creeping up her neck. She looked utterly mortified. This was not the reaction Eleanor expected. Clarice Thorne, for all her sharp edges, had a reputation to uphold. The idea that her new husband had been secretly funded by his mother, that their grand wedding was not entirely a Thorne affair, clearly hit a nerve. Eleanor pressed on, seizing the moment. "Arthur didn't want you to know. He needed to compete on your level, Clarice. He needed to prove himself worthy of you and your world. And he felt he couldn't do that as the son of a literature professor from Savannah. He felt he had to pretend to be someone he isn't, all to impress you and your family. Clarice stared at Eleanor, speechless. The fury had drained from her face, replaced by a dawning comprehension and something akin to humiliation. The, the stupid table, she mumbled. I, I'm sorry about the table, it was rude. Her apology, though transactional, felt strangely genuine in its raw shame. Eleanor gave a small, sad smile. An apology for the table isn't what I need, Clarice. What Arthur needs is to remember who he truly is. The boy who earned his sneakers, not the man who buys his way in. She walked to her purse, pulling out a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of her and Graham, Eleanor's late husband, taken years ago, laughing on their front porch in Savannah. She handed it to Clarice. Remind him of this, Clarice, of where he came from, of the values we taught him. Clarice took the photo, her fingers brushing over the aged paper. She studied it for a long moment, then looked up at Eleanor, a strange, hesitant expression on her face. For what it's worth, she said, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to her earlier snarl. The table wasn't my idea. It was my mother's. With that quiet confession, Clarice turned and walked out, leaving Eleanor alone once more, the faded photograph now clutched in her hand. The revelation was a chilling twist. It wasn't just Clarice. There was another, more insidious hand pulling the strings. The true enemy, Eleanor realized, was more deeply entrenched than she had ever imagined. The quiet elegance of the Newport Hotel's breakfast restaurant was a welcome balm after the emotional tumult of the previous night and morning. Eleanor, nursing a cup of Earl Grey, watched the gentle waves of the Atlantic through the panoramic window, contemplating the wreckage of her relationship with Arthur. Clarice's parting confession about her mother orchestrating the table still echoed in her mind, a new layer of intrigue in this unsettling drama. Just as she was about to take a delicate sip, a shadow fell across her table. She looked up to see Sterling Thorne, Clarice's father, standing there. He was impeccably dressed as always, his presence commanding, yet something in his eyes suggested a deeper complexity than the polished facade he usually presented. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice a low rumble, devoid of his usual socialite charm. I understand there's been some confusion about the honeymoon arrangements. Eleanor merely nodded, a silent invitation for him to continue. There was no point in feigning ignorance or attempting pleasantries. Sterling settled into the chair opposite her, uninvited but not unwelcome. His gaze was direct, piercing. Let me be frank, Mrs. Vance. When my daughter expressed interest in Arthur, I had him thoroughly investigated. Eleanor felt a chill. Of course he had. This was a man who left nothing to chance. We discovered a promising surgeon, he continued, with mounting debt, a man living well beyond his means, desperate to ascend. He was, to put it mildly, an excellent investment for my family's future, but not without significant personal liabilities. He paused, a flicker of something almost like regret crossing his face. My wife, Victoria, and Clarice, they navigate ruthlessly in a world where appearance is everything. They believe in strength and pedigree above all else. His words were not an apology, but an explanation, stark and chilling in their honesty. Then unexpectedly his tone softened, a hint of something raw and authentic breaking through his polished exterior. I wasn't born into this, he confessed, surprising Eleanor. I was a coal miner's son from western Pennsylvania. Dirt poor. I married for pedigree just as Arthur married Clarice for status. I built my own fortune, clawed my way out of the pit, and into this world of old money and inherited expectations. He looked at her, a strange kinship in his eyes. I saw Arthur. I saw him mortgaging his integrity, sacrificing his true self to buy entry into our world, just as I once did. Eleanor listened, stunned. This was not the man she had dismissed as merely arrogant and superficial. This was a man who understood the depths of Arthur's ambition and the painful compromises it demanded. Sterling reached into his inside jacket pocket, pulling out a thick, sealed envelope. He placed it on the table between them. Inside, he explained, you'll find the details of Arthur's prenuptial agreement with Clarice. It's quite restrictive, ensuring Clarice's assets remain separate. You'll also find documentation of a substantial trust fund Victoria, my wife, secretly set up for Arthur after their engagement. It was designed to keep him financially pliable, a permanent ward, ensuring his dependence on the Thorne family. Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she reached for the envelope, the full extent of the manipulation now terrifyingly clear. Victoria, Clarice's mother, was truly the puppeteer, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. Then, Sterling leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a glint of something unreadable in his eyes. "And about your home, Mrs. Vance," he said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "The Coleman collection. Quite legendary in certain circles, particularly those interested in American literary first editions. Whitman, Thoreau, Melville. A truly remarkable library, housed in what appears to be a rather unassuming Savannah residence." Eleanor froze, her teacup halfway to her lips. Her shabby Savannah home, inherited from her family, held a secret, a priceless collection of literary treasures, meticulously gathered by generations of scholars. Arthur knew nothing of its true value. Clarice certainly did not. But Sterling Thorne, the shrewd coal miner's son, had done his homework. He knew everything. He knew not just her son's secrets, but hers. He pushed back his chair, rising slowly. "Perhaps," he suggested, a knowing smile playing on his lips, "there are lessons about true value still to be learned by both of them." With a nod, Sterling Thorne turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor alone with the envelope, the chilling revelations, and the dawning realization that her quaint southern home held a power she had yet to fully wield. The long drive back to Savannah from Newport was a blur of highway and introspection. Eleanor clutched the steering wheel, the envelope from Sterling Thorne resting on the passenger seat, a physical testament to the intricate web of deception and hidden truths. She was still reeling from the bombshell of the Coleman collection and Sterling's unsettlingly accurate assessment of her family's most private asset. Her phone rang, shattering the quiet hum of the road. Snos. "It was Arthur," Eleanor answered, bracing herself. "Mother, do you have any idea what kind of catastrophe you've created?" His voice, usually so composed, was high-pitched, almost frantic, laced with a venom she had never heard directed at her before. Eleanor remained silent, waiting. She knew this was coming. "Robert Bennett," Arthur spat, naming a prominent art dealer with whom Sterling Thorne clearly had connections. He had quite a lot to say about the Coleman family. About their assets. The word hung in the air, dripping with accusation. "And what did he say, Arthur?" Eleanor asked, her voice calm, a deliberate counterpoint to his escalating rage. "He said you're sitting on a fortune. First editions, Mother. Whitman, Thoreau, Melville. He said they're worth millions, millions. Why in God's name would you hide something like that from me? While I was working myself to the bone, trying to make something of myself, you were living in that shabby house, pretending we were ordinary." His voice cracked, a raw mix of fury and betrayal. Eleanor signaled, pulling her car carefully onto the shoulder of the highway, the tires crunching on gravel. She took a deep breath. "Arthur," she began, her voice soft but firm, "the Coleman collection is more than just money. It's a legacy, a trust. Generations of scholars, writers, thinkers who believed in the power of words, not just their monetary value. It was never meant to be sold off to fund a lavish lifestyle. It was meant to be preserved, cherished." She paused, letting him absorb her words. "And I was waiting for the right time, Arthur. Waiting for you to show interest in your family history, in your heritage, in something beyond what it could buy you. Waiting for you to find value in intangible things again." The silence on the line was different this time. Less furious, more reflective. Then his voice, when it came, was quieter, laced with a profound weariness. "How could I, Mother," he confessed, the anger draining away, replaced by a desperate vulnerability. "How could I admit that I needed my mother's help to afford the life his daughter expected? How could I tell them that everything I was building, everything I was trying to be was a facade? That underneath the expensive suits and the New York practice, I was still that kid from Savannah, trying to prove himself worthy?" His voice dropped to a near whisper. "I've been trying so hard to belong in her world, Mother, that I forgot to question if it was a world worth belonging to." The admission, so raw and honest, was a balm to Eleanor's wounded heart. "Do you remember that summer we spent on the Outer Banks?" Arthur continued, a note of wistful nostalgia in his voice. Just you and me, living in that little rented cottage, catching crabs, reading on the beach, no pretensions, no keeping up with anyone. Just us. A small, sad smile touched Eleanor's lips. I remember, darling. Clarice, he continued, his voice hardening slightly, actually suggested we take pictures for Instagram at a luxury resort near our real destination in the Alps, just to pretend we were in the Maldives, so people would think we'd booked a more exotic trip. The sheer absurdity of it hung in the air, painting a vivid picture of the empty, image-obsessed world he had been trying to enter. Then Arthur delivered his own bombshell. The honeymoon is canceled, Arthur. I've already called Veronica and told her, and I've asked for an annulment. I'm taking the train down to Washington, D.C. I'm going to stay with Ethan for a while. Ethan, his oldest and most ordinary friend from college, a history teacher who valued genuine connection over material wealth. Eleanor closed her eyes, a wave of relief washing over her. The unraveling had begun. He was coming home, in a way. Not to Savannah, not yet, but to himself. I'll be here, Arthur, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Whenever you're ready. She knew the road ahead for Arthur would be long and painful, filled with difficult truths and rebuilding. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope, a fragile promise of the son she knew, emerging from the gilded cage he had built for himself. The familiar embrace of her Savannah home was a comfort Eleanor hadn't realized she desperately needed. The scent of jasmine and old books, the worn comfort of her armchair, it all whispered of permanence and authenticity. She was still processing Arthur's confession, the raw vulnerability in his voice, a stark contrast to the hardened facade he'd presented for so long. 2 days after her return, the phone rang. It was Vivian Thorne, Clarice's younger sister, her voice surprisingly gentle and sincerely apologetic. Mrs. Vance, I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry for everything at the wedding. My family, especially my mother, can be quite overbearing. Vivian confirmed that Arthur was indeed with Ethan, safe and sound. He sounded different, she added, a note of quiet hope in her voice. More like the person I remember from when he first started dating Clarice, before all the pressure. A fragile seed of hope began to sprout in Eleanor's heart. 2 weeks later, Arthur called. His voice, though still tinged with weariness, held a new lightness, a genuine warmth she hadn't heard in years. Mom, he began, I've accepted a position at Memorial Hospital here in Savannah. It's a fantastic opportunity, a chance to really connect with patients again, not just chase status. Then he added, and Vivian, she's applying for teaching jobs at the local high school. She sees the real me, Mom, and she actually likes that person better than the one I was pretending to be. Eleanor listened, tears prickling at her eyes, a profound sense of relief washing over her. He spoke of his shame, his regret, but also of a newfound clarity. And the Coleman collection, he said, a note of genuine curiosity now in his voice. I want to understand it, Mom, not just as valuable objects, but as our family history, our legacy. He was finally looking beyond the monetary, embracing the true meaning of inheritance. A few months later, Arthur came to visit, a small velvet box in his hand. He nervously opened it, revealing Graham's antique sapphire ring, a cherished family heirloom that had belonged to his great-grandmother. I know it's not some massive diamond, Mom, he mumbled, a faint blush on his cheeks. Do you think Vivian would prefer something bigger? Eleanor smiled, a full, warm smile that reached her eyes. She took his hand. Arthur, I think the woman who drives a 10-year-old Subaru, who teaches high school history, and who sees your true heart will understand exactly what this ring represents. It represents love, history, and authenticity. Things money can't buy. Years melted into a tapestry of healing and growth. The honeymoon money withheld by Eleanor became the seed for the kitchen table scholarship program, funding aspiring medical students from underserved communities who valued service over lavish income. It thrived, a testament to true generosity. Eleanor, now a beloved figure in Savannah, became affectionately known as Professor Kitchen Table by the scholarship recipients and local historians, a nod to her famous, albeit initially humiliating, origin story. Sterling Thorne, unexpectedly, became a quiet patron. He backed the establishment of the Kitchen Table, a celebration of authenticity, a permanent exhibit at the Savannah Historical Society, featuring artifacts from Eleanor's family history, and prominently, a reproduction of the humble table from that infamous wedding. Arthur, now married to Vivian, became a passionate steward of the Coleman collection, working alongside Sterling to meticulously preserve and document its treasures. He had truly found his calling, not just as a surgeon, but as a guardian of his family's intellectual heritage. Even Clarice found her own path. After her annulment, she initially struggled, but eventually, with Sterling's support, she pivoted. She adopted a son, Ethan, named after Arthur's friend, a subtle nod to her past, and dedicated herself to working with her father's foundation, focusing on community outreach. She learned to value true impact over superficial appearances, and while she and Eleanor would never be close, there was a quiet, mutual respect, a genuine warmth that had once seemed impossible. The final scene, years later, was a tableau of true wealth. Not glittering chandeliers, but the warm glow of Eleanor's expanded kitchen table. Around it sat Arthur, now a loving husband to Vivian, their eyes shining with quiet contentment. Sterling Thorne and a surprisingly mellowed Victoria were there, their presence a testament to unlikely alliances formed through shared understanding. Even Clarice, radiant and genuine, her young son nestled on her lap, joined them. Laughter, easy and unforced, filled the room, mingling with the aroma of home-cooked food. Arthur raised his glass, a genuine, heartfelt smile on his face. To kitchen tables, he toasted, his eyes meeting Eleanor's, full of love and gratitude. Where real life happens, where real value is found, and where sometimes the greatest lessons are learned. From the stark humiliation of a forgotten mother, relegated to a kitchen table in the glittering Rosecliff mansion, to a vibrant gathering of chosen family around an expanded symbol of true connection, Eleanor's journey became a testament to authenticity. She, in her elegant navy blue dress, once watched her son Arthur, then William in the excerpt, turn away, his gaze fixed on a superficial future. The crystal chandeliers reflected not joy, but the cold reality of his ambition. Yet, by refusing to fund a lavish lie, Eleanor forced Arthur to confront the truth of his gilded cage. He shed the pretenses, left the world of keeping up appearances with Clarice, Veronica in the excerpt, and rediscovered his genuine self. With Vivian, later Clarice in the outline, he built a life rooted in shared values, not in inherited wealth. Even Clarice and Sterling, once architects of manipulation, found their own paths to authenticity, ultimately uniting at Eleanor's table. Professor Kitchen Table became a beacon of genuine connection, transforming past hurts into a legacy of learning and love. The true wealth, Arthur finally understood, wasn't in diamonds or honeymoons, but in the unwavering embrace of family, integrity, and the simple, profound moments that truly matter. The kitchen table became the center of their real lives.